Welcome one and all, Mr. Fusion here. 10 years ago, I put out a series of 5 videos. They were very early on in my YouTube channel's life. I didn't even have 100 subscribers. Those videos detailed a recent resurgent fascination, exploring how my childhood favorite Mighty Morphin Power Rangers had been adapted from various series of Super Sentai. To this day, they remain among the highest viewed videos I've ever created, despite the relatively low production value, the poor quality source of available Power Rangers clips, my own inexperience at creating content, and the fact that I was limited to a mere 11 minutes per video for the majority of them. I'm happy they stand up so well even after all this time, but now that I approach the 10th anniversary of this project, I do find myself feeling I could do more. While I covered the first season over the course of 2 videos, I only scratched the surface of the sizable hoops the creative team at Saban jumped through to adapt Kyouryuu Sentai Zyuranger into Season 1 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Now I really want to compare individual episodes and decide which series did the better job. Does Zyuranger's holistic production create more consistent episodes than Power Rangers' cobbled together Frankenstein approach? Or does the benefit of hindsight allow Power Rangers to shore up its parent show's weaknesses? For a more detailed look, where better to start than at the beginning? Welcome to the all-new Mighty Morphin Zyurangers. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers' first episode, Day of the Dumpster, adapts the first episode of Kyouryuu Sentai Zyuranger, The Birth. The overall beats remain largely the same. Unwitting astronauts release an evil witch from a long imprisonment. In order to stop her, a benevolent wizard in a hidden fortress assembles a team of 5 heroes who utilize the power of prehistoric animals. They possess martial arts prowess on their own, but they can transform into colorful warriors to access the true reserves of their power. But beyond the broad strokes, the 2 episodes are remarkably different. The concept of Power Rangers exists by recycling certain footage from Zyuranger while creating their own show with footage of new American characters around it. Much of the footage involving the villains is simply ported over and dubbed into English. Likewise, since a lot of the fight footage involves actors in costumes that completely conceal their faces, be it the transformed Zyurangers, the rubber-suited monsters they face, and the giant robots they pilot, those are all ripe for the taking as well. Primarily, it's all the footage involving the untransformed heroes that had to go. By combining the Zyuranger fight footage with wraparound footage of their American counterparts, the goal was to conceal the fact that the resulting combination was a combination at all. And while it largely succeeded in fooling children back in the 90s, under a critical eye, Saban's inexperience shows to a large extent in these earliest episodes. However, it's easy to sympathize with them, especially in episode 1. The Birth and Day of the Dumpster exist to fulfill 2 entirely different purposes. Zyuranger was the 16th yearly installment of the Super Sentai franchise. So while it was a new story with new characters, the concept of transforming heroes and their giant robots was firmly established. Day of the Dumpster had to introduce a foreign concept to a young audience in less than 30 minutes. The Birth serves to set up all the exciting adventures to follow. Day of the Dumpster exists to showcase every concept viewers can expect to see in the following episodes. As such, Day of the Dumpster moves at a breakneck pace compared to The Birth, skimming over a lot of the details of the original plot, not just because the footage can't be used, but because the episode has to cover a lot more ground. In fact, The Birth isn't even a complete episode on its own. It's half of a 2-parter. While Day of the Dumpster might have been better served narratively by taking a similar approach, I can understand why they'd want to hit the ground running. The bulk of footage reused in this episode is the opening showcasing how the witch Bandora is freed by astronauts. Much of this is retained to depict the release of Rita Repulsa, although trimmed down. Since a main objective is to obscure the footage's Japanese origin, all shots of the interior of the spacecraft are removed. But as the astronauts wear face-concealing spacesuits once they leave, that footage is able to be used. The most glaring omission, though, is the fact that in Zyuranger, 2 children are brought along as well, and ensuring their safety serves as the primary conflict the Zyurangers must face in the first 2 episodes. No such characters exist in Power Rangers, and the spaceflight serves no purpose beyond releasing Rita. Once freed, Bandora makes her presence known in as ostentatious a way as possible. She rearranges skyscrapers, steals the tower building, and returns it with her Bandra Palace, situated on top of it. She then proceeds to monologue to the entire populace about how she hates love and children before getting into a quick magic fight with her benevolent counterpart, the sage Barza. This motivates Barza to summon the Zyurangers. It's a rousing sequence of events that demonstrates what Bandora is all about and the threat she poses to the world. The cluster of buildings topped with her palace is a fantastic visual. It's a shame that Power Rangers uses practically none of it. The character spends the majority of the season isolated on the moon, rarely directly interacting with the heroes. Opening Zyuranger by having Bandora herself in the thick of things forges a much more direct connection. As a 7-year-old, I'm sure my jaw would have dropped to see Rita herself causing havoc on Earth. Instead, Barza's counterpart, Zordon, is alerted to Rita's return because of a nondescript earthquake and a few generic shots of people running towards shelter. It doesn't even remotely pack the same punch. The only bit of this sequence that is retained for Power Rangers is a moment Zordon shows the soon-to-be Rangers on his viewing globe. The viewing globe often serves as a repository for snippets of Zyuranger footage that otherwise can't be used in the series. Devoid of context, these moments usually feel like a random tutorial. What are Rita and Goldar doing, taking a victory lap? Power Rangers was always a target of parental watch groups for its violence. It's no surprise that Saban was trying to head off controversy. Differing broadcast standards for children also played a role in what material was retained or excised. While in Power Rangers the astronauts are seemingly ignored after releasing Rita and her henchmen, Bandora is not nearly so charitable. She blows them off the surface of planet Nemesis, presumably to drift in space until they die horribly. The first episode of MMPR might water down the macro conflict, but that's because it devotes quite a bit more time to establishing its lead characters. Within a series of scenes at Ernie's juice bar, the disposition of the show's 5 leads are conveyed. And yes, these 5 teenaged friends are fairly broadly drawn. Jason is the leader and most experienced martial artist. Zach is an exuberant dancer working his way through martial arts training as well. Kimberly is a Valley Girl gymnast. Billy is a recalcitrant nerd with little fighting prowess. And Trini is, well, somewhere in the middle of all those traits. There's nothing deep here, but it does have a significant leg up over Zyuranger's first episode in this regard. The Zyurangers don't even appear until 10 minutes into the episode, and even then it's only 4 of them. And they aren't given any characterization outside of proving themselves extraordinarily inept, unless you want to count Barza's crack about May not having time to put on makeup. Because she's the girl. Again, to give credit where it's due, Zyuranger isn't trying to establish everything in this first episode. Its climax is simply in getting Geki, the Tyranno Ranger, into the story at all and having all 5 of them transform. Even so, Power Rangers establishes at least as many main and recurring players in its first episode as Zyuranger accomplishes in its entire run. Zyuranger's Day 1 main cast consists of the 5 Rangers themselves, the mentor character, and the main villain and her entourage, all of which have corresponding counterparts in Power Rangers. In addition, Day of the Dumpster introduces Ernie, the proprietor of the juice bar, Alpha 5, the frantic robot assistant of Zordon, and of course the school bullies Bulk and Skull, who primarily serve as comic antagonists for the heroes to thwart outside of their other lives as superheroes. That Power Rangers is able to effectively set up all of this while still cramming in stock footage is quite a feather in its cap, and surprisingly the strongest part of the episode. Power Rangers sets up quite a stark contrast between the heroes it creates as opposed to the heroes it's adapting. Admittedly, we don't get a lot of Zyuranger's exposition until the second episode, but I'll go ahead and give it here. 170 million years ago, quite a step up from the paltry 10,000 years Rita was said to have been imprisoned. The world existed in a weird mishmash of prehistoric dinosaurs and medieval-esque humans. There were 5 tribes, each devoted to an ancient animal. Everyone lived in peace until Bandora attacked. The 5 guardian beasts sealed her away on the planet Nemesis, but each tribe selected a warrior who could later be revived and fight back should Bandora return. Since then, they've all been entombed in a temple accessible by elevator far below a random Japanese condominium, where Barza poses as the kindly custodian. As such, getting the Zyurangers into action requires nothing more than Barza pulling out his janitor keys and opening the doors. They're all too eager to resume the mission they've already volunteered for. In fact, they're so eager they run off without the medallions they need to transform. The only holdout is because Geki's key breaks off in the door, leading to his absence until the plot decides to open it for him. Power Rangers' leads aren't from prehistoric times. They haven't been sealed away, they aren't warriors. They're ostensibly average teenagers plucked up by Zordon for reasons. There happen to be 5 of them sitting at a table, I guess. Zordon seems to have some idea of their characteristics when he's talking them up, so I guess he's been stalking them. Understandably, the teenagers aren't terribly thrilled with being drafted for this assignment. What's a little less understandable is how unimpressed they are after having their matter scrambled and introduced to a giant floating head. Yeah, right, see you later, I'd rather just die in the desert, thanks. But having a cast of reluctant heroes gives them something approaching a journey this episode, as opposed to the Zyurangers simply rushing headlong into certain death. Rita is completely stupid for sending her foot soldiers, putties, to attack the deserting Rangers, since, if she hadn't, they might never have had a reason to fight back against her. But since she wasn't privy to the conversation, perhaps she simply didn't know any better. However, the scene works in continuing to establish the various personalities and skill sets of the individual characters, while providing them with sufficient motivation to accept their new powers and responsibilities. Once again, I kinda have to give Power Rangers the advantage here. Once they morph though, that's when things start going off the rails. The final act of the birth is pretty straightforward. Bandora has shrunk down the space shuttle with the 2 kids trapped inside and attached it to a needlessly elaborate death trap set to a timer. The Zyurangers head to Bandora's palace to fight, which they do for a while. Eventually Don, the Tricera Ranger, and May, the Terra Ranger, succeed in saving the space shuttle. But then Bandora's first monster, Dora Titan, punches a hole in the building and snatches the shuttle back before they all disappear, ending the episode on a cliffhanger. Okay, I said it was straightforward, not necessarily sensical. Power Rangers has absolutely none of that. Since the Space Shuttle kids and Bandora's palace on Earth aren't set up in MMPR, the reused Zyuranger footage serves as a generic battle sequence. Even though the whole reason the kids decide to morph is so they don't get killed fighting the putties, the instant they do, Zordon teleports them into the city to fight Goldar because he's there now, doing something. You'll find that teleporting is the go-to device for the series quickly inserting the characters into unrelated stock footage. The whole thing makes Zordon come across as very manipulative. Oh, you used my toys? Well, now I have the right to send you wherever I want. Make it so, Alpha. So they spend a few seconds in the Zyuranger footage from episode 1. But again, Day of the Dumpster is attempting to function as a microcosm of the entire series. It needs to show off all of the elements. Like I said, Zyuranger's first episode is satisfied simply to get all 5 characters assembled and into a transformed fight before credits roll. Everything else is to be built towards over time. Over the following several episodes, the Zyurangers will slowly but surely build up their arsenal of giant robots and eventually learn to combine them into a single powerful entity. Power Rangers doesn't have that luxury. So cobbling together a whole bunch of footage from various later episodes, Rita makes Goldar grow. In between shots, he's suddenly stomping around in the wilderness after the show had made such a big deal out of spontaneously bringing the Rangers into the city. The Power Rangers summon their Zords, which they magically know how to pilot. There's a throwaway, barely audible line of the characters commenting on this. They immediately combine and cycle through their various forms in order to get to the giant robot fight. Then Jason summons the Power Sword, something that not even Zordon's earlier exposition mentioned, and Goldar runs away. And all of this, from the time they morph until the fighting is resolved, spans just over 5 minutes. There is no specific conflict, resulting in a satisfying test run for the heroes, but one that's a little disjointed. Even as a 7-year-old, I picked up on how random the Power Sword was. But it does serve as an effective demonstration of what Mighty Morphin Power Rangers has to offer, and it does so in a much more self-contained package than Kyouryuu Sentai Zyuranger manages. Of course, the main problem is that since the show is adapting Zyuranger, the next few episodes will have to walk back a lot of the progress the first episode made, resulting in stories that make far less sense than this one. Both episodes are rough in their own ways. Power Rangers at least has the excuse of setting up a brand new concept. Zyuranger's narrative is structured more competently and benefits substantially from being more fleshed out. However, the characterization of its own leads will have to wait. But the biggest problem by far is that much of the supposed drama comes from forced conflict that seems to serve no purpose beyond padding out the narrative. Geki's key breaking feels contrived, as does the timing of when the Guardian Beasts decide to solve the problem. These conflicts would feel much more satisfying if the characters used their cunning to solve problems, rather than the plot arbitrarily deciding when those obstacles should be overcome. Not to mention the majesty of that first transformation loses a bit of punch when you remember that it was only delayed due to their own stupidity. But, you know, we're talking Super Sentai and Power Rangers. I'd be here all day if I mentioned every aspect of poor plotting. And now I introduce my arbitrary scoring system. We have 3 categories that I think are worthy of consideration and gives each series a sporting chance. Story, characterization, and action. Overall, in terms of story, The Birth wins due to its better defined conflict. There's some silliness, but it does a far better job of making the audience understand why Bondora needs to be stopped. In terms of characterization, Day of the Dumpster wins easily. Who are the Zyurangers? No clue. But those teenagers are pretty fun. Finally, as far as action goes, I feel Zyuranger's first transformation carries more grandeur despite its contrived setup. In Power Rangers, I'm still reeling from the fact that we were hurried away from Vasquez Rocks to fight on some random roof to really soak it in. On the flip side, while the nascent Power Rangers have an excuse for fighting poorly, the 4 supporting Zyurangers do not come out of this looking good. On top of that, while the space shuttle saving is cute and silly, the cobbled together Megazord fight serves as a much more dynamic conclusion. So while it technically only wins by cheating and because The Birth is not a complete episode on its own, Day of the Dumpster has the edge. So Day of the Dumpster and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers win this contest. Well, there you go. The first episode of each respective series. What do you think? I can continue on for the rest of the series if you like, just let me know. And you can do so through the more phenomenal means of engaging with this video. Liking, commenting, and subscribing increases my connection to the morphing grid. And contributing on Patreon unlocks my Battleizer mode. Oh, Daijujin in heaven, did I really write this?